The gold band felt cold against Willa Thompson's palm as she placed it on the pawnbroker's counter, her fingers trembling so badly she had to press them flat against the scarred wood to steady herself. She had carried that ring 3,000 miles from Boston, sewn into the hem of her best dress, and now here she stood in a dusty shop in Kansas City, Missouri, watching a man with tobacco-stained fingers hold it up to the lamplight as if weighing not just the metal but her very soul. $20, he said, not meeting her eyes. It's worth 50 at least, Willa protested, her voice cracking despite her determination to sound firm. The stones are real sapphires. My father had it made for my mother in 1846. The pawnbroker shrugged, already losing interest. $20, or you can take it elsewhere. But you won't find better in this city, miss. That's just how things are. Willa closed her eyes and saw her mother's face, pale against the white pillows in those final days, pressing the ring into her daughter's hand. When you find your own happiness, wear this, she had whispered. But happiness seemed like a luxury Willa could no longer afford. Her mother had been dead 3 months, her father had followed 6 weeks later, and the creditors had taken everything else. The advertisement she had seen for a teaching position in Red River, New Mexico Territory, was her last hope, and the ring was the only thing standing between her and starvation before she could get there. $20, she agreed, the words tasting like ash. The money felt heavy in her reticule as she stepped back into the bright May sunshine of 1873. She had just enough now for the stagecoach fare, a few nights' lodging, and perhaps one decent meal before she reached Red River. After that, she would have to trust that the school board would honor the contract they had sent, that the position was real, that this desperate gamble would somehow transform into a future. The journey took 3 weeks, each mile harder than the last. The stagecoach rattled and swayed across endless prairies, through territories where the grass stretched to the horizon like a green ocean. They changed horses at dusty way stations where the water tasted of iron, and the food was mostly beans and hardtack. Willa's traveling companions changed too, families and gamblers and prospectors cycling through, each with their own dreams pulling them westward. By the time they crossed into New Mexico Territory, Willa's black mourning dress was gray with dust, and she had learned to sleep sitting upright, her head bouncing against the wooden frame. The landscape changed here, becoming wilder, more dramatic. Red rock formations rose from the earth like ancient cathedrals, and the sky seemed impossibly vast, a blue so deep it hurt to look at. Red River announced itself with a hand-painted sign, and a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the summer heat. The town was larger than Willa had expected, bustling with the kind of energy that came from silver strikes in the nearby hills. She counted 2 saloons, a general store, a hotel, a church with a white steeple, and what looked like a school building at the far end of town. The stage driver helped her down, and she stood in the street clutching her carpetbag, suddenly aware of how alone she was. Every other passenger had someone waiting, arms outstretched in welcome. Willa had only a letter from a Mr. Jameson, head of the school board, promising employment. "You the new school teacher?" a voice asked. Willa turned to find a woman in her 50s, broad-shouldered and direct, wearing a practical calico dress and an expression of frank assessment. "I'm Martha Hayes. My husband's on the school board. We heard you might be arriving soon." "Willa Thompson," she managed, relief flooding through her. "Yes, I'm here for the teaching position." Martha nodded approvingly. "You look sensible enough, despite that Boston dress. Come on, we've got a room ready for you at the boarding house. You can clean up and meet the board tomorrow." School doesn't start until September, but we like to get our teachers settled early. Last one ran off after 2 weeks, said the wilderness was too much for her constitution. Willa followed Martha down the wooden sidewalk, trying not to stumble in her exhaustion. I assure you, Mrs. Hayes, I'm not planning to run anywhere. I've come a long way to be here. That's what they all say, Martha replied, but her tone was kind. We'll see how you feel after your first winter. The snow gets deep here and the wind comes down from those mountains like the voice of God himself. The boarding house was clean and plain, with whitewashed walls and simple furniture. The room they gave Willa was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a window that looked out toward the mountains. And after sleeping on the stagecoach, the bed felt like heaven itself. She unpacked her few belongings, hung her 2 dresses to air, and washed the travel dust from her skin with water from the pitcher. Only then, sitting on the edge of the bed in her chemise with her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders, did she let herself cry. Not loud, wrenching sobs, but quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks as she thought of her mother's ring, sitting in some pawnbroker's case in Kansas City, waiting for a stranger to claim it. It had been the last physical piece of her parents she possessed, and now it was gone, sacrificed to get her here to this wild place at the edge of civilization. She allowed herself 5 minutes of grief, then dried her eyes and began to braid her hair. Crying wouldn't bring the ring back. Crying wouldn't change anything. She was here now, and she had to make this work. The next morning, Martha came to fetch her for the meeting with the school board. Willa wore her better dress, dark blue with black trim, still appropriate for mourning but less severe than the black. She pinned her hair up carefully, and tried to look like someone capable of managing a classroom of frontier children. The meeting was held in the church, and the board consisted of 5 men, including Martha's husband, a lean man named Thomas Hayes, and Mr. Jameson, who turned out to be the town's doctor. They asked her about her education, her teaching experience in Boston, her ability to handle students of various ages in a single classroom. Willa answered each question honestly, drawing on the 2 years she had taught at a girls' academy before her parents' illnesses had consumed all her time and resources. We have about 30 students, Dr. Jameson explained, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Some of the ranch families only send their children when they can spare them from work, so you'll have irregular attendance. We can't pay much, $30 a month, but the room and board are included. $30 a month. It was barely anything, but it was something. It was survival. I understand, Willa said. When would you like me to begin preparing the classroom? The men exchanged glances, and she saw approval in their expressions. Whenever you're ready, Thomas Hayes said. School building's yours to organize as you see fit. We'll have the books delivered next week. After the meeting, Martha walked Willa to the school building, a sturdy log structure with a pitched roof and windows that let in the morning light. Inside, rows of benches faced a teacher's desk, and a blackboard dominated one wall. It smelled of chalk dust and pine sap and possibility. It's not fancy, Martha said, but the children who come here are eager to learn. Their parents work hard, ranchers mostly, some miners. They want better for their children than they had. Willa ran her hand over the teacher's desk, feeling the grain of the wood. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. This was hers, this classroom, this chance. She would make it enough. The summer weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Willa cleaned every surface in the schoolhouse, organized the books when they arrived, created lesson plans for multiple age groups. She walked through town each day, learning the rhythms of this place, the way the miners came down from the hills on Saturday nights, how the ranch hands rode in for supplies, the schedule of the stagecoach and the freight wagons. She met some of her future students, shy children who peeked at her from behind their mothers' skirts in the general store. Their parents were polite but reserved, waiting to see if this new teacher would last longer than the previous one. Willa understood. She was an outsider here, unproven. She would have to earn their trust. She tried not to think about her mother's ring, but some nights she would dream of it, the gold band warm against her skin, the sapphires catching the light. In her dreams, she was back in Boston, sitting at her mother's bedside, and everything that had happened since was just a nightmare from which she could wake. But then morning would come, and she would be in Red River, and the ring would still be 3 states away in a pawnbroker's shop. The last Saturday in August, Willa was in the general store purchasing slate pencils when the door opened and a man walked in who made every head turn. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore dusty work clothes, leather chaps over denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a battered hat that he removed as he entered, revealing a tanned face that spoke of days spent under the sun. But it was something else that drew attention, some quality of quiet competence, the way he moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely at home in his own skin. "Morning, Samuel," the storekeeper called out. "The supplies you ordered came in yesterday." "Much obliged, Henry," the man replied, his voice deep and warm with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "I'll load up the wagon." Willa found herself staring and quickly looked away, focusing intently on the slate pencils as if they were the most fascinating objects she had ever encountered. She heard the man, Samuel, moving around the store, the soft clink of goods being gathered, the low murmur of conversation with the storekeeper. Then his voice came from directly behind her. "Excuse me, miss." She turned, and up close he was even more striking, with sun-weathered lines at the corners of his eyes and a mouth that looked like it smiled often. He was holding a bag of flour and needed to reach past her for the sugar. "Oh, I'm sorry," Willa said, stepping aside quickly. He nodded his thanks, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. She saw something there, a flicker of interest, before he looked away and reached for what he needed. Then he was moving toward the counter, and Willa found herself feeling oddly disappointed that the moment had ended. "That's Samuel York," Henry the storekeeper told her after Samuel had left with his supplies. "Runs the York Ranch about 5 miles north of town. Good man, keeps to himself mostly. Lost his wife to cholera 4 years back, been raising his younger sister on his own since." "The girl will be one of your students," Willa nodded, processing this information. "A widower, a rancher, a man with kind eyes and calloused hands who had survived loss and kept going. She wondered if he ever felt as alone as she did, or if the work and the land were enough to fill the empty spaces." School began the first week of September. 23 children showed up that first day, ranging from little Emma Carson, who was barely 6 and missing her front teeth, to Jake Miller, who was 15 and already taller than Willa, clearly attending under duress from his parents. And there was Samuel York's sister, a girl of 13 with her brother's blue eyes and a serious expression that suggested she took education very seriously indeed. "I'm Lily York," she said when Willa called roll. "My brother says you came all the way from Boston. Is that true? What was it like?" "It's true," Willa confirmed, "and I'll tell you all about it, but first we need to establish our classroom rules and expectations." The day went well, better than she had dared hope. The children were curious and respectful, and while managing so many different ages and skill levels was challenging, Willa found herself energized rather than exhausted by the work. This was what she was meant to do, she realized. Teaching filled something in her that had been empty since her parents died. She saw Samuel York again 2 weeks later when he came to pick up Lily after school. Most of the children walked home or rode together, but the York ranch was far enough that Samuel made the trip with a wagon. He waited outside, leaning against the hitching post, and when Lily emerged chattering excitedly about a geography lesson, he listened with the full attention of someone who genuinely cared about what she was saying. Willa stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching them. There was such tenderness in the way Samuel looked at his sister, such patience. He might be a rough cowboy who worked with cattle and horses, but he was raising Lily with obvious devotion. As if sensing her gaze, Samuel looked up and caught her eye. He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, and Willa felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She nodded back, then retreated inside before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. "This is ridiculous," she told herself firmly. She had been in Red River less than 4 months. She was still mourning her parents, still finding her footing in this new life. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, no matter how kind his eyes were or how gentle he was with his sister. But over the following weeks, she found herself looking forward to the days when Samuel came to collect Lily. Sometimes he arrived early and would wait in the schoolyard, and Willa would watch him through the window, noticing the way he calmed a nervous horse with a touch, how he helped a small child retrieve a dropped lunch pail, the quiet competence with which he moved through the world. October arrived with cool nights and aspens turning gold in the mountains. Willa had been teaching for nearly 2 months, and Red River was beginning to feel less like exile and more like home. She knew her students' names and their struggles, which children needed extra help with reading, which ones excelled at arithmetic. She knew the rhythm of the town, the way Saturday nights were boisterous and Sundays were quiet, how the miners and ranchers existed in an uneasy but functional peace. She had stopped thinking about her mother's ring every day. Sometimes a whole week would pass before she remembered it, before she felt that pang of loss. She told herself this was progress, that she was moving forward with her life. Then Samuel York appeared at the schoolhouse door one Friday afternoon after all the children had left. "Miss Thompson," he said, his hat in his hands, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." "Of course, Mr. York," Willa said, setting down the papers she had been grading. Her heart was beating faster, though she could not have said why. "Is something wrong with Lily?" "No, Lily's doing fine. Better than fine, actually. She talks about your lessons every evening." He paused, seeming to search for words. "I wanted to thank you for that. Her education means a lot to me. I never had much schooling myself, and I want better for her." "She's a wonderful student," Willa said honestly, "bright and curious. You've done well by her." Samuel smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger, less careworn. "I've done my best. It hasn't always been easy, but she makes it worthwhile." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain. "Miss Thompson, I also wanted to ask if you might consider coming to dinner at the ranch tomorrow evening. Nothing fancy, just supper with Lily and me. She's been asking to have you out, wants to show you the horses and such. But if it's too forward, or if you're not comfortable, I understand." Willa's first instinct was to refuse. It would be improper, wouldn't it, to have dinner alone with a man she barely knew, even with his sister present. But then she looked at Samuel's earnest expression, thought of Lily's bright enthusiasm in class, and realized she was applying Boston standards to a frontier situation. Things were different here. Besides, she wanted to go. She wanted to see where they lived, to sit at their table, to learn more about this man who intrigued her despite her best efforts to remain professionally distant. "I would be delighted," she heard herself say. "What time should I arrive?" The relief on Samuel's face was unmistakable. "Around 4. That'll give Lily time to show you around before supper. I can come fetch you in the wagon if you'd like, or if you prefer, you could borrow a horse from the livery." "The wagon would be perfect," Willa said. "Thank you, Mr. York." "Samuel," he said. "Please call me Samuel." "Mr. York was my father." "Then you should call me Willa." He smiled again, and Willa felt that flutter in her chest intensify. This was dangerous territory, she knew, but she was tired of being careful, tired of holding herself apart from life. Maybe it was time to take a risk on something other than survival. Saturday afternoon arrived clear and bright, the air crisp with the promise of coming winter. Willa changed her dress 3 times before settling on a dark green calico that Martha Hayes had helped her choose at the general store, practical but flattering. She felt nervous in a way she had not felt since she was a girl, and she had to laugh at herself as she pinned her hair up. It was just dinner. It did not mean anything. But when Samuel arrived with the wagon, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, she knew it meant something to him. The way he helped her up to the wagon seat, the care with which he had brushed down the horses, the slight color in his cheeks, all of it spoke of a man who had taken trouble over this invitation. They rode north out of town, following a track that climbed gradually into the foothills. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they went, a particular rock formation, the creek where the cattle watered, the boundary line of his property. His ranch, when it came into view, was more substantial than Willa had expected. The main house was built of logs, with a covered porch and glass windows that must have cost a fortune to freight in. There was a large barn, several corrals, and what looked like a bunkhouse for hired hands. "It's not much," Samuel said, with the modesty of someone who had built something significant and was reluctant to boast, "but it's home." Lily came running out before the wagon had fully stopped, her face alight with excitement. "Miss Thompson, you came. Come see the horses. I want to show you my mare. Her name is Buttercup and she's the sweetest thing. And oh, the barn cats just had kittens. You have to see them." "Lily, give Miss Thompson a chance to catch her breath," Samuel said, but he was smiling. "Maybe she'd like some water first after the dusty ride." "Actually, I'd love to see the horses," Willa said, charmed by Lily's enthusiasm. "Lead the way." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions. Lily showed her Buttercup, a gentle Palomino mare with a white blaze. They visited the kittens in the barn, tiny balls of fluff that tumbled over each other in the hay. Samuel demonstrated how he was training a young colt, his voice low and patient, his movements careful. Willa watched his hands on the horse's neck, the way the animal responded to his touch, and felt something shift inside her. This man was not just competent or kind. He had built a life here through sheer determination, had carved out a home in this wild place, had raised his sister with love and devotion. He was everything she had not known she was looking for. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. The main room served as kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. There were rag rugs on the wooden floor, curtains at the windows, a rocking chair by the hearth. Books lined a shelf near the window, more than Willa would have expected. Samuel saw her looking at them. "Lily's mostly," he said. "Though I've been known to read a bit myself when winter keeps us inside. My wife was a reader. She started the collection." It was the first time he had mentioned his late wife directly, and Willa heard the old grief in his voice, never fully healed but learned to live with. She understood that feeling intimately. "What happened to her?" she asked quietly, while Lily was busy setting the table. "If you don't mind my asking." "Cholera, 4 years back. There was an outbreak that summer. It took her and both my parents within 2 weeks." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I was 22 years old," suddenly responsible for a 9-year-old girl and a ranch to run. There were days I didn't think I'd make it, but Lily needed me and the ranch needed tending, and you don't get to quit just because things are hard. No, Willa agreed softly. You don't. My parents died this past spring, 6 weeks apart. My mother had been ill for a long time, and when she finally passed, my father just seemed to give up. The creditors took everything. I sold my mother's wedding ring to afford the journey out here. Samuel turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intent. That must have been hard, parting with it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, Willa admitted. But I didn't have a choice, and I suppose it brought me here, which has turned out better than I dared hope. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition of shared loss and shared resilience. They were both survivors, both people who had faced hardship and refused to break. It created a connection deeper than words. Supper was simple but delicious. Beef stew with vegetables from the kitchen garden, fresh bread, apple pie that Lily had made herself. They ate at a wooden table by the window, and conversation flowed easily. Lily chattered about school and her friends, asked Willa endless questions about Boston, declared her intention to visit a big city someday. Samuel was quieter, but Willa felt his attention on her, the way he listened when she spoke, how he smiled at her stories about her more challenging students. After dinner, while Lily washed the dishes, Samuel walked Willa out to the porch. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The air had turned cold and Willa shivered in her shawl. I should get you back to town before it's full dark, Samuel said, but I'm glad you came. It's been a long time since we had company and longer still since I've enjoyed it this much. I enjoyed it too, Willa said. Thank you for inviting me. Your home is lovely and Lily is a delight. Samuel was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the evening chill. She was acutely aware of his height, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he was looking at her as if trying to memorize her face. Willa, he said, her name soft in his mouth. I know this might be too soon, and if I'm reading this wrong, just tell me and I'll never mention it again. But I'd like to court you properly. I'd like to call on you, take you to church socials, let the whole town see that I'm interested. If you'd be willing. Willa's breath caught. She had known, of course, that there was attraction between them. But hearing him say it out loud, putting words to what she had been feeling, made it real and immediate and thrilling. I'd be willing, she said, and watched his face light up with joy. On the ride back to town, they talked about everything and nothing, the conversation of two people learning each other. Samuel told her about growing up in Texas, about how he had come to New Mexico territory with his parents when he was 18, helped them build the ranch from nothing. Willa talked about Boston, about teaching at the girls' academy, about how different and better this life felt despite its hardships. When they reached the boarding house, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. May I see you tomorrow, after church? Yes, Willa said simply. She watched him drive away, then went inside feeling lighter than she had in months. Martha Hayes was waiting in the sitting room, and from the knowing look on her face, she had seen Samuel's careful attention through the window. That's a good man, Martha said. Lost his wife young, but he didn't let it make him bitter. He'll treat you right if that's the direction you're heading. I think it might be, Willa admitted. Is that foolish? We barely know each other. Foolish would be ignoring something good because you're scared, Martha replied. You've both seen enough loss to know that happiness doesn't come around every day. When it does, you grab hold of it. Over the next weeks, Samuel courted her with a determination that was both flattering and endearing. He came to town every Sunday after church and walked her through the streets, letting everyone see them together. He attended the school's autumn recital and sat in the front row, clapping loudest when Willa's students performed their rehearsed pieces. He brought her small gifts, a book of poetry he thought she would enjoy, a shawl in colors that matched her eyes, wildflowers that grew on the high slopes of his ranch. Willa found herself falling in love, not with the dramatic passion of penny novels but with something deeper and more solid. She loved the way Samuel listened when she talked about her students, how he took her opinions seriously, never talking down to her despite his years of frontier experience. She loved watching him with Lily, the patient way he answered her endless questions, how he encouraged her dreams even when they seemed impractical. She loved his quiet strength, the sense that here was a man who would weather any storm and still be standing. They talked about everything during those weeks, their childhoods, their losses, their dreams for the future. Samuel wanted to expand the ranch, maybe start breeding horses as well as cattle. Willa wanted to establish a lending library for the town, maybe teach evening classes for adults who had never had the chance to learn reading. Their visions of the future began to intertwine, two separate lives weaving into one shared path. But Willa had not told him about the exact circumstances of how she came west. She had mentioned selling her mother's ring, but not the full story, not the desperation that had driven her to that pawnbroker's shop, the way she had felt physically ill handing over the last piece of her parents she possessed. It felt too raw, too shameful somehow, even though she knew she had done what she needed to survive. November arrived with the first real cold, frost sparkling on the ground each morning. Samuel invited Willa to come to the ranch for Thanksgiving, and she accepted, helping Lily prepare an enormous meal of roast turkey and all the trimmings. It felt natural, working alongside Samuel's sister in his kitchen, as if she belonged there. Samuel watched them from his chair by the fire, a smile playing at his lips, and Willa knew he was imagining this as their future. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Samuel and Willa sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The Milky Way stretched overhead like a river of light, more stars than Willa had ever seen in her life. "I love you," Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night. "I know it's only been a few months, but I'm old enough to know my own heart. I love you, Willa Thompson, and I want you in my life. I want to marry you if you'll have me." Willa turned to look at him, this good man who was offering her everything she had thought lost, a home, a family, a future. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily because they were true. "But there's something you should know first, about how I came here, about my mother's ring." She told him the whole story then, leaving nothing out. The creditors, the desperation, the pawnbroker in Kansas City. How she had felt like she was betraying her mother's memory, selling the one thing she had been told to keep. How sometimes she still woke up from dreams where she could feel the ring's weight on her finger, only to remember it was gone. Samuel listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he took her hand in both of his. "You did what you had to do," he said firmly. "There's no shame in that. Your mother would have understood. She gave you that ring to help you find happiness, and in a way, that's exactly what happened. If you hadn't sold it, you wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have found each other." "I know," Willa said, "but I still wish I had it, not for the value but because it was hers. Because it connected me to them." "I understand," Samuel said. "Believe me, I do. After my wife died, I held onto her things for too long, couldn't bear to let them go. But eventually I realized she wasn't in those objects. She was in my memories, in the life we had built together, in Lily who has her smile. Your parents aren't in that ring. They're in you, in the strength that brought you here, in the kindness you show your students." Willa leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "You're right. I know you're right. And yes, Samuel York, I will marry you." His arms came around her, holding her close, and Willa felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she had not felt since before her parents fell ill. This was where she was meant to be. They set the wedding for early December, a simple ceremony in the town church with Martha Hayes helping Willa prepare and most of Red River in attendance. Willa wore a new dress in deep blue, store-bought from Santa Fe and altered to fit her, with lace at the collar and cuffs. It was pretty, but as she stood in the church dressing room preparing to walk down the aisle, she found herself wishing she had her mother's ring to wear, even just for this day. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting Willa's hair one final time. "Samuel's a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Willa replied and meant it. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Dr. Jameson, who was also the town's justice of the peace, performed the service. Lily stood up with Willa as her attendant, beaming with joy at gaining a sister. Thomas Hayes stood with Samuel. They spoke their vows in steady voices, Samuel's hands warm and sure as he held hers, and when Dr. Jameson pronounced them married, Samuel kissed her with such tenderness that Willa felt tears prick her eyes. The whole town seemed to be at the reception afterward, held in the church hall with food and music and dancing. Willa waltzed with her new husband, stumbling over the steps since she had never been a graceful dancer, laughing when Samuel caught her before she could trip. She danced with Lily, with Thomas Hayes, with some of her older students who had come with their families. It felt like being embraced by an entire community, being told she belonged here now, that Red River was her home. As the evening wound down, Samuel leaned close to whisper in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. York, Mrs. York." The name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said, "let's go home." The ranch house was quiet when they arrived, Lily having agreed to spend the night with Martha Hayes to give them privacy. Samuel carried Willa over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, then set her down gently in the main room where a fire crackled in the hearth. He had prepared the house before leaving for the wedding. She saw fresh flowers on the table, candles lit, the bed in the back room turned down. "I want you to be happy here," Samuel said, his hands on her shoulders, his blue eyes serious. "I want this to be your home, truly yours. If you want to change things, redecorate, whatever you need, just tell me." "I'm already happy," Willa said, reaching up to touch his face. "You've given me everything I thought I'd lost. A home, a family, a future. I don't need anything else." That night, as Samuel held her close in the darkness of their bedroom, Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here. The losses and the risks, the pawned ring and the desperate gamble on a teaching position in a place she had never seen. All of it had led to this moment, to this man, to this life that felt miraculous in its ordinary happiness. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Samuel replied, his voice already thick with sleep. "Always will." Winter settled over Red River with a quiet intensity. The snows came in mid-December, transforming the landscape into something white and pristine. School continued, though some of the ranch children could not make the journey on the worst days. Willa and Samuel settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. She woke early to make breakfast before Samuel headed out to tend the cattle. He came home each evening to find dinner ready and Lily working on her lessons at the table. They fell into rhythms, small domestic rituals that built a life together. Lily blossomed with Willa in the house, no longer carrying the weight of being the household's woman while still just a girl. She and Willa became close, more like sisters than teacher and student. Some evenings, after Samuel had fallen asleep by the fire, they would sit together and talk about everything, books and dreams and the lives they wanted to build. January brought bitter cold and more snow. The ranch work became harder, Samuel and his two hired hands struggling to keep the cattle fed and healthy. Willa worried about him on the days when he came home with his face wind-burned and his hands nearly frozen despite his heavy gloves. She would make him sit by the fire and would bring him hot coffee and would massage warmth back into his fingers, and he would look at her with such love that it made her breath catch. "Don't know what I did to deserve you," he said one such evening, his voice rough with exhaustion. "You were yourself," Willa replied simply. That was enough. February came, and with it, a break in the weather. The snows eased, and Samuel decided to make the trip into Santa Fe for supplies they could not get in Red River. It was a 2-day journey each way, and he was reluctant to leave Willa and Lily alone that long, but they insisted they would be fine. The hired hands were staying in the bunkhouse, close enough to call for help if needed. "I'll be back in 5 days," Samuel promised, holding Willa close before he mounted his horse. "6 at most if the weather turns. You're sure you'll be all right?" "We'll be fine," Willa assured him. "Lily and I have lessons to work on, and I want to reorganize the bookshelf. Go and travel safely." She watched him ride away, the pack horse trailing behind, until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she went back inside to where Lily was waiting, and they spent the day in comfortable domestic activity, baking bread and mending clothes and reading aloud from a novel they were working through together. 3 days passed without incident. On the 4th day, Willa walked into town to check on the schoolhouse and purchase a few items from the general store. Henry, the storekeeper, was sorting through some items on the counter, things people had sold or traded for credit. "Picking over estate sales and such," he explained when he saw Willa looking. "Sometimes you find interesting pieces. Like this ring here came in with a lot from a pawnbroker in Kansas City who was liquidating. Pretty thing, gold with sapphires. Probably worth a bit, but I got it cheap since he was desperate to move inventory." Willa's heart stopped. She moved closer, her hand reaching out before she could stop herself. There, on the counter amid the jumble of other items, was her mother's ring. She would have known it anywhere, the particular shade of the sapphires, the delicate engraving on the band that her father had designed himself. "That's mine," she heard herself say, her voice strange and distant. "That's my mother's wedding ring. I pawned it in Kansas City to afford the journey here." Henry looked at her in surprise. "Is that so? Well, it seems to have found its way back to you, though I did pay for it, so I can't just hand it over. I'd need to recoup my costs at least." "How much?" Willa asked, already calculating what little money she had saved from her teaching salary. It would not be enough, she knew, but she had to try. "I gave $15 for the lot, and that ring's the best piece in it. I'd need at least $12 to let it go." $12. It might as well have been $100. Willa had maybe $3 saved, and that was meant for a gift for Samuel's birthday next month. Tears pricked her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. To have the ring here, so close, and still not be able to claim it was almost worse than having it lost in Kansas City. "Could you hold it for me?" she asked desperately. "Just for a little while until I can get the money together." Henry's expression softened. "I'll hold it for a week," he said. "But after that, if someone else wants to buy it, I'll have to sell. I'm running a business here, not a charity. I'm sorry." Willa nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and left the store before the tears could fall. She walked back to the ranch in a daze, her mind spinning. $12. Where could she get $12? Her salary was paid monthly, and she had just been paid. She could not ask Samuel. It would feel too much like begging, and besides, he was in Santa Fe and would not be back for at least another day. That evening she told Lily what had happened, unable to keep it to herself. Lily listened with wide eyes, then immediately offered the $3 she had saved from doing odd jobs around town. "It's your ring," Lily said fiercely. "You should have it back. Take my money." "I can't," Willa protested, even as her heart warmed at the offer. "You've been saving that for months, and it wouldn't be enough anyway." They sat in troubled silence, watching the fire burn low. Willa tried to tell herself it was just a thing, just metal and stones, but it did not feel that way. It felt like her mother was within reach, and she was failing to grasp her hand. Samuel came home the next afternoon, a day earlier than expected, his saddlebags full of supplies. He swept Willa into his arms, kissing her soundly, telling her how much he had missed her. She tried to return his enthusiasm, but he knew her too well now and saw through her forced cheer immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "What happened while I was gone?" So Willa told him, the words tumbling out. About seeing the ring in the general store, about how it had somehow made its way from Kansas City to Red River, about Henry's price and her inability to pay it. Samuel listened intently, his expression growing thoughtful. When she finished, he simply said, "Show me." They rode into town together, leaving Lily at the ranch. The general store was about to close, but Henry let them in when he saw who it was. Samuel asked to see the ring, and Henry produced it, placing it on the counter. Samuel picked it up, held it to the light, examined the engraving. "This is the one?" he asked Willa. "Yes," she confirmed, her throat tight. "That's my mother's ring." Samuel set it down carefully and looked at Henry. "I'll give you $15 for it. That's what you paid for the whole lot, if I heard right. Fair price." "More than fair," Henry agreed, looking surprised. "You sure about this, Samuel? $15 is a lot of money." "I'm sure," Samuel said firmly. He pulled bills from his pocket, money he must have been carrying from sales he had made in Santa Fe, and counted out $15 onto the counter. "The ring's worth more than that to my wife, and that makes it worth more than that to me." Henry took the money and handed over the ring. "Pleasure doing business with you." Outside, in the fading light of late afternoon, Samuel took Willa's left hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had never left. "I know we have wedding rings," he said softly, "but I wanted you to have this back. Your mother gave it to you, and you shouldn't have had to lose it just to survive. If I'd known before, if we'd met sooner, I would have done this then. But I'm doing it now." Willa could not speak past the tears clogging her throat. She looked down at the ring on her finger, the gold glowing warm against her skin, the sapphires catching the last light of the day. It felt like a piece of herself had been returned, like she was whole again in a way she had not been since she left Boston. "Thank you," she finally managed. "Samuel, thank you. You don't know what this means to me." "I think I do," he said, pulling her close. "I know what it is to lose pieces of the people you love. If I can give you one back, that's the least I can do." They rode home in the gathering darkness, Willa's hand in Samuel's, the ring solid and real on her finger. When they reached the ranch, Lily came running out and squealed with delight when she saw the ring. They celebrated with the special dinner Willa and Lily had been saving for Samuel's return, and afterward, Samuel produced the other items he had brought from Santa Fe. "These are for you," he said, handing Willa a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside were books, a dozen of them, new volumes for the schoolhouse library. There was also a length of beautiful green fabric, enough for a new dress, and a small box containing a silver brooch shaped like a wildflower. "You spoil me," Willa protested, even as she ran her fingers over the gifts with delight. "That's my right as your husband," Samuel replied, grinning. "Get used to it." That night, lying in bed with her head on Samuel's chest, Willa turned her hand this way and that, watching the ring catch the moonlight streaming through the window. I keep thinking about how impossible this is, she said softly. Of all the pawnbrokers in all the cities between here and Kansas City, my ring ended up with one who sold his inventory to someone who shipped it to Santa Fe, and it ended up in Red River. What are the odds? I don't know, Samuel admitted, but I'm glad it happened. You were meant to have it back. Do you think things happen for a reason? Willa asked. That there's some plan guiding everything? Samuel was quiet for a moment, thinking. I think terrible things happen sometimes, and good things happen sometimes, and mostly we just do our best to deal with what comes. But I also think that when something good happens after a lot of bad, it's okay to believe it was meant to be. Gives us hope to face the next hard thing. I love you, Willa said, for what felt like the 1,000th time but still not enough. I love you so much. I love you too, Samuel replied, his arms tightening around her. Now sleep. Tomorrow's another day, and the cattle don't care if we stayed up talking about fate and rings. Willa laughed and closed her eyes, the ring warm against her skin, her husband's heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the fear and uncertainty and risk. She had left Boston with nothing but desperation and a pawned ring. She had arrived in Red River with no guarantee of anything. And now she had a home, a family, a purpose, and most miraculously, the ring had found its way back to her. Maybe Samuel was right. Maybe some things were just meant to be. Spring came to the mountains with a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers. The aspens leafed out in brilliant green, and the meadows filled with columbine and Indian paintbrush. Willa's students grew restless as the weather warmed, their attention wandering to the windows and the sunshine beyond. She understood the feeling. She found herself eager to finish each school day so she could go home to the ranch, to Samuel and Lily and the life they were building together. In April, Willa realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired, slightly nauseated in the mornings, and her monthly courses had not come. Martha Hayes confirmed her suspicions with a knowing look and a warm hug. "Does Samuel know?" Martha asked. "Not yet," Willa admitted. "I wanted to be sure first, but I'll tell him tonight." She planned it carefully, cooking Samuel's favorite meal, waiting until after dinner when they were alone on the porch watching the sunset. Lily had gone to visit a friend in town and would not be back until tomorrow. It was just the two of them, the peace of the evening settling around them. "Samuel," Willa said, reaching for his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she assured him quickly. "Everything's right, actually. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." For a moment, Samuel just stared at her as if the words had not quite registered. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're going to have a baby. Willa, that's wonderful. That's the best news I've ever heard." They stood there holding each other as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Willa felt Samuel's hand move to rest gently on her stomach, still flat but holding their future. She covered his hand with hers, the gold of her mother's ring gleaming against his sun-browned skin. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I've never done this before. What if something goes wrong?" "Then we'll face it together," Samuel said firmly. "Just like we've faced everything else. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong, and our baby will be strong too." Lily was ecstatic when they told her. She immediately began planning, declaring she would be the best aunt in the entire territory. She started knitting tiny garments, her stitches uneven but made with such love that Willa found herself tearing up every time she looked at them. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through spring and into summer. Willa continued teaching, though she grew more tired as the months passed. She finally stopped when school let out for the summer, and by then she was showing enough that standing for hours had become uncomfortable. She spent her days at the ranch instead, tending the kitchen garden, preserving vegetables for winter, preparing for the baby's arrival. Samuel became impossibly protective, worrying over her every moment. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, riding horses, or doing any task he deemed potentially dangerous. It would have been suffocating if it had not been so clearly motivated by love. Willa tolerated his hovering with good humor, occasionally reminding him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time and she would be fine. In late October, as the aspens turned gold and the air took on an autumn chill, Willa went into labor. It was late afternoon, and Samuel was in the barn when her water broke. Lily ran to fetch him, and Samuel came sprinting into the house with a look of panic on his face that would have been comical if Willa had not been in the grip of a contraction. "I'm getting Martha," he announced. "And Doctor." "Jameson, don't move, just stay right there." "I'm not planning on going anywhere," Willa managed through gritted teeth. Martha arrived within an hour, calm and competent, taking charge of the situation with practiced ease. "Doctor." Jameson came soon after, and together they guided Willa through the long hours of labor. Samuel stayed close, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even when she squeezed his hand hard enough to leave marks. Their son was born just after midnight, arriving with a lusty cry that filled the small bedroom. Dr. Jameson placed the baby in Willa's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He's beautiful," Samuel said, his voice thick with tears. "He's perfect. Willa, you did it." "We did it," she corrected, too exhausted to say more but needing him to know she could not have done this without him. They named him James after Willa's father, with Samuel's father's name, Robert, as his middle name. James Robert York, born in a ranch house in the mountains of New Mexico Territory, perfect and healthy and loved beyond measure. Lily was allowed in once everything was cleaned up, and she approached the bed with reverent steps, her eyes huge as she looked at her nephew. "He's so small," she whispered. "Can I hold him?" Willa showed her how to support his head, and Lily sat carefully in the rocking chair, cradling James with such tenderness that Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks. This was family, she thought. Not just blood, but the bonds they chose to build, the love they gave freely. She had lost her parents, but she had gained this, and it was enough. It was more than enough. The winter passed in a haze of sleepless nights and feeding schedules, and the particular exhaustion that comes with caring for a newborn. But there were also moments of piercing joy, James's first smile, the way Samuel would hold his son and sing old cowboy songs in his deep voice, how Lily proved to be an excellent helper, entertaining the baby when Willa needed rest. By spring, when Willa returned to teaching, leaving James with Lily during school hours, she felt like she had lived several lifetimes since arriving in Red River. The frightened woman who had pawned her mother's ring seemed like a stranger now. That Willa had been broken by loss, uncertain of her future, surviving day to day. This Willa was strong, certain, building a life she loved with people who loved her in return. The years flowed by like water, each season bringing its own rhythms and rewards. James grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child. Lily graduated from Willa's school and began courting a nice young man from one of the neighboring ranches. The ranch prospered under Samuel's steady management. Willa continued teaching, her students coming and going, each class leaving its mark on her heart. In the summer of 1876, Willa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, her body older and more tired than with James. But in March of the following year, she delivered a healthy daughter they named Rose, after Samuel's mother. Rose had Willa's dark hair and Samuel's blue eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her older brother everywhere, determined not to miss out on any adventure. Lily married her sweetheart in the summer of 1878, a joyful celebration that brought tears to Samuel's eyes as he walked his sister down the aisle. They settled on their own small ranch about 10 miles away, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have their own independence. More children followed for Willa and Samuel. A second son, Thomas, in 1879, and finally another daughter, Grace, in 1881. The house that had seemed spacious when Willa first arrived now rang with children's laughter and the chaos of a large family. Samuel expanded it, adding another bedroom and a larger kitchen, and Willa filled it with love and order and the kind of warm domesticity she had never imagined having. She still taught, though she took time off when each baby was born and sometimes worked reduced hours when the children were very young. But the schoolhouse remained her second home, and her students continued to be a source of joy and purpose. She had become a fixture in Red River, someone the community relied on, respected, loved. Samuel's hair began to gray at the temples in his 30s, and Willa noticed lines forming around her own eyes when she looked in the mirror. But they were laugh lines, earned through years of happiness more often than not. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and sick cattle, and the endless work of maintaining both a ranch and a household. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. One evening in the spring of 1883, after the children were all in bed, Willa and Samuel sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were older now, both past 40, but still strong, still partners in every sense of the word. Willa wore her mother's ring on her right hand now, having moved it when Samuel gave her a wedding band. But she still wore it every day, and sometimes she would catch herself turning it absently, remembering. "You ever think about how we met?" Samuel asked, as if reading her thoughts. "About how close we came to missing each other entirely. All the time," Willa admitted. "If I hadn't pawned the ring, I couldn't have come west. If the ring hadn't somehow made its way to Red River, you wouldn't have been able to give it back. So many things had to happen exactly right for us to end up here." "I'm glad they did," Samuel said simply. He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring. "I'm glad you were brave enough to risk everything on a future you couldn't see. I'm glad the ring found its way home. I'm glad for all of it, every moment that led us here." "Me too," Willa said softly. "Even the hard parts, even the loss, because it brought me to you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Inside, they could hear the children settling down, James reading to his younger siblings, Rose protesting that she was not tired yet. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life built through love and determination, and no small amount of luck. Willa thought about the woman she had been 10 years ago, standing in a pawnbroker's shop with tears streaming down her face, giving up the last piece of her parents to gamble on survival. If she could go back and tell that woman what waited for her in the future, would she believe it? Would she understand that the pain and the risk would transform into this incredible joy? Probably not. Some things you had to live through to understand. "I love you," she said to Samuel, because it never got old saying it. "I love you too," he replied, his hand warm in hers. Always have, always will. The years continued their steady march. James grew tall and serious with his father's love for the land and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 16, he was already talking about studying agriculture, about new techniques for ranching he had read about. Rose was wild and fearless, climbing trees and riding horses as well as any boy, making Samuel laugh even as he worried about her safety. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, showing an early talent for drawing that Willa encouraged by giving him paper and pencils whenever she could. Grace was still young, but already showing signs of being the peacemaker of the family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept everyone happy. Lily had 3 children of her own now, and the 2 families gathered often for dinners and celebrations. The ranch had expanded over the years, with several hired hands living in an enlarged bunkhouse and helping with the work. Samuel had achieved the dream he had shared with Willa all those years ago, breeding horses as well as raising cattle, and the York Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the territory. Willa had become the elder teacher, training younger teachers who came to Red River, sharing her decades of experience. She had also started that lending library she had dreamed of, a room in the church filled with donated books that anyone could borrow. It was not much, but it brought her deep satisfaction to see children and adults alike discovering the joy of reading. In 1889, when Willa was 47 years old, New Mexico became a state. The whole town celebrated, and Willa stood with Samuel and their children, watching fireworks light up the sky, marveling at how much had changed since she had first arrived 16 years ago. Red River was larger now, more prosperous, connected by railroad to the rest of the growing nation. But it still felt like home, still had that frontier spirit that had attracted her in the first place. James married in 1890 to a smart young woman named Emily who had been one of Willa's students years ago. They settled on a portion of the ranch that Samuel gave them, building their own house within sight of the main building. Within a year, Willa was a grandmother, holding James's daughter in her arms and marveling at the continuation of life, the way one generation flowed into the next. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a doctor. It was unheard of, a woman in medicine, especially out here on the frontier. But Willa and Samuel supported her dream, helping her find a medical school in the East that would accept women students. She left for Philadelphia in 1892, 17 years old and determined to prove herself. Thomas showed no interest in ranching, and after much discussion, Samuel and Willa agreed to send him to art school in Santa Fe. It was not the life Samuel had imagined for his son, but he loved the boy too much to force him into a mold that did not fit. Grace, their youngest, was still at home, now a young woman of 11 who helped Willa with teaching and seemed likely to follow in her mother's footsteps. In the summer of 1893, Willa and Samuel celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The whole community came together for a party at the ranch, tables set up in the yard, music and dancing, and an abundance of food. James and Emily were there with their 2 children. Lily came with her family. Rose had traveled home from Philadelphia, full of stories about her studies. Thomas sent a painting he had made specially for the occasion, a landscape of the ranch that captured it perfectly. Standing in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by family and friends, Willa felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 20 years ago, she had married Samuel not really knowing what the future would hold, only that she loved him and wanted to try. Now, looking around at everything they had built together, she could hardly believe how blessed they had been. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the children had dispersed to their various rooms and houses, Samuel presented Willa with a gift. It was a simple wooden box, handmade, with her initials carved into the lid. "I'm not much for speeches," Samuel said, "but I wanted you to have this. I made it myself over the winter." Inside the box, Willa found letters, dozens of them. She picked one up, confused, and realized it was written in Samuel's hand, addressed to her. "I wrote you a letter every month for the past 20 years, Samuel explained, looking almost shy. "Just little things, what I was thinking, what I loved about you, memories I wanted to preserve. I thought maybe someday, when we're really old, we can read them together and remember." Willa's eyes filled with tears. She pulled out one letter at random and read it, recognizing the date as being from about 10 years ago, when Rose was a baby and James had just started school. "My dear Willa," it began. "Today I watched you teaching James his letters at the kitchen table, and I was struck again by how lucky I am to have you. You have such patience, such kindness. I hope our son grows up knowing how special his mother is. I hope all our children understand that they have been given a gift in you. I know I have." "Samuel," Willa whispered, unable to say more. 20 years, Samuel said, pulling her close. "And I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Willa York." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, too," Willa replied. "You gave me back my mother's ring, but more than that, you gave me a life worth living. You gave me everything." They stood there holding each other as the stars came out, the same stars they had watched together for 20 years, from the same porch, in the house that had become their home. Willa twisted her mother's ring on her finger, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, the desperation and the risk and the incredible, impossible joy that had followed. She had pawned her mother's ring to come out west, and a cowboy had found it and given it back. But the ring was the least of what he had given her. He had given her a family, a purpose, a love that sustained her through every hardship. He had given her a future she could never have imagined standing in that pawnbroker's shop all those years ago. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked softly. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," Willa said, "for all of it. The good and the bad, the easy times and the hard. It all brought us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Samuel agreed. "For as long as we have, this is where I want to be, with you." The years that followed were gentle ones. Samuel and Willa settled into their 50s, still active but beginning to slow down, letting the next generation take on more of the work. James managed most of the ranch operations now, proving himself as capable as his father. Emily was pregnant with their third child. Rose completed her medical training and returned to New Mexico, opening a practice in Santa Fe but visiting Red River often. Thomas established himself as an artist of some renown, his paintings of the Southwest appearing in galleries back east. Grace, true to prediction, became a teacher, taking over Willa's position at the school when Willa finally retired in 1898 at the age of 56. Retirement suited Willa. She had given 35 years to teaching, had shaped the lives of hundreds of children in Red River and the surrounding ranches. Now she could focus on her grandchildren, of which she had 6 by the turn of the century, with more likely on the way. She could read for pleasure, tend her garden, help Grace prepare lessons when asked, but mostly just enjoy the life she and Samuel had built. Samuel was 62 now, his hair fully gray, his hands gnarled from years of ranch work. But he was still strong, still capable, still the same man Willa had fallen in love with all those years ago. They had grown old together, had weathered every storm side by side, and the love between them had only deepened with time. On a spring morning in 1901, Willa woke early and went to sit on the porch with her coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Samuel joined her, moving a bit stiffly, his joints protesting the years of hard work. "Beautiful morning," he commented, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. "They all are," Willa replied. "I don't think I'll ever get tired of this view." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of knowing each other. Inside, the house was quiet, all the children grown and gone to their own lives. It was just the two of them again, as it had been at the beginning, the circle completing itself. "You have any regrets?" Samuel asked suddenly. Willa considered the question seriously. "Not real ones," she finally said. "I wish my parents could have met you, could have seen the life I built here. I wish they could have known their grandchildren. But that's grief, not regret. Every choice I made, even the hard ones, led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same," Samuel said. "I wish my first wife had lived, that my parents had survived to see the ranch succeed, that Lily hadn't had to grow up without a mother. But I can't regret the path that brought me to you. You've made every day of the past 28 years better just by being in it." Willa reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. She glanced down at their joined hands, at the gold band of her mother's ring gleaming in the morning light. It had been with her through everything, lost and found again, a symbol of endurance and love and the unexpected ways life could surprise you. "Tell me the story again," Samuel said, a smile playing at his lips. "About the ring." "You know the story," Willa protested. "You lived half of it." "I know. Tell me anyway." So Willa told it, the story they had shared so many times over the years it had become part of their family mythology. How she had pawned her mother's ring in Kansas City, desperate and grieving, using the money to travel west to an uncertain future. How Samuel had found the ring months later in the general store, recognized its importance, and bought it to give back to her. How that act of kindness had been the beginning of everything. "It was meant to be," Samuel said when she finished, as he always did. "That ring traveling all those miles through all those hands just to find its way back to you, just to bring us together." "Maybe," Willa conceded. "Or maybe it was just luck, good and bad mixed together. Either way, I'm grateful." "Me too," Samuel said. "Every single day." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, warming the air, bringing the promise of another beautiful day. 37 years had passed since Willa first stepped off the stagecoach in Red River, scared and alone. 28 years since she had married Samuel in the little church, not knowing what the future would hold. And here they were, old now but not done, their love as solid and enduring as the mountains that surrounded their home. Inside, the house that had sheltered their family through all those years stood ready for another day. Their children and grandchildren would visit soon, filling the rooms with noise and laughter. The ranch would continue, passed down through generations. The school would keep teaching Red River's children. Life would go on as it always did. But for now, in this perfect morning moment, it was just Willa and Samuel, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through love and determination, and no small amount of luck. The ring on Willa's finger caught the light, sapphires sparkling, and she thought about her mother's words all those years ago. "When you find your own happiness, wear this." She had found her happiness. She had found it in a wild place with a cowboy who had given her back more than just a ring. He had given her a home, a family, a future beyond anything she could have imagined. And she wore the ring every day, a reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled, both in miles and in spirit. "I love you," she said to Samuel, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "I love you too," he replied, squeezing her hand, "until the end of time." And there, on a porch in New Mexico as the new century unfolded around them, two people who had survived loss and found love sat together, grateful for every moment, every choice, every twist of fate that had brought them to this perfect, ordinary, miraculous life. The ring gleamed on Willa's finger, no longer a symbol of loss but of homecoming, of love given and returned, of a journey that had ended exactly where it was meant to.